Have you ever felt like you can't say no to someone, even when it's really hurting you? Or perhaps you're always trying to fix other people's problems to the point that you neglect your own needs. If you've ever found yourself trapped in a cycle where your happiness and sense of worth depends on others, you might be struggling with codependency. And in this video, I'm going to share 9 key symptoms of codependency, explain why they happen, and show you how to break free from these patterns, starting today. So if you're interested, stick around. Hi there, welcome back to my corner of the internet. I'm Nidhi Kapoor, a certified life coach and hypnotherapist. So let's dive straight in. And first, let's define what codependency is. You see, at its core, codependency is a dysfunctional relationship dynamic where one person becomes excessively reliant on another for emotional support, approval, or identity. In essence, your sense of self-worth is entirely tied to someone else's well-being, behavior, or opinions. Codependent people often lose sight of their own needs and desires, focusing on others at the expense of their own mental and physical health. Let me explain codependency better using some examples. So let's take Kelly, for example. She's in a relationship with her partner. Let's call him Ben. Ben has a demanding job and often comes home exhausted and moody. Kelly, who deeply cares for Ben, feels like it's her responsibility to fix his mood and make him happy. Over time, she begins to neglect her own needs, constantly trying to lighten Ben's emotional load. She stops meeting up with her friends or doing things that make her feel good because Ben is often too tired or distracted to join her. Kelly doesn't realize it, but her sense of identity and happiness is becoming entirely dependent on Ben's mood and well-being. In this situation, Kelly feels that if Ben is upset, she's upset. And if Ben's happy, she feels good about herself. She begins to lose touch with her own sense of self. Her happiness is no longer something she creates for herself. Rather, it's tied to Ben's emotional state. Let's take another example in a professional scenario. Let's say Mark. Mark is a manager at his company, and he has a tendency to overwork and take on additional tasks for his team, even when they can manage on their own. Mark feels it's his responsibility to make sure everything runs smoothly, and he believes if he's not constantly busy or helping others, he's failing as a manager. Over time, this mindset leads him to work long hours, ignore his own health, and lose touch with his family life. The more Mark tries to please others and keep everyone happy, the more he begins to feel drained and unappreciated. He starts questioning his worth and whether he's doing enough. In Mark's case, his self-esteem becomes tied to how much he can do for others. His value is no longer about who he is. It's about what he does for everyone around him. You see, these examples illustrate how codependency can manifest in both personal relationships and work settings. Whether it's focusing all your energy on fixing someone else's problems or neglecting your own needs to make others happy. Codependency often leaves you feeling drained, unfulfilled, and disconnected from your true self. This pattern often stems from early life experiences, such as growing up in an environment where your emotional needs were unmet, or you learned that love was conditional on how well you took care of others. So let's look at 9 key symptoms that show that you are codependent. Number 1. You lose yourself in relationships. If you find yourself constantly adapting your behaviors, opinions, and desires to fit those of your partner, friends, or family, it's a huge sign of codependency. You might feel like you can't be yourself unless you're with somebody else. Or worse, you might not even know who you are without them. For example, Sarah starts dating someone and quickly abandons her hobbies, friends, and even her career ambitions because she wants to meet his needs. Over time, Sarah forgets what makes her happy, and her self-worth becomes entirely dependent on how well the relationship is going. Her identity is so tied to him that when he feels upset, she feels lost, anxious, and unsure of herself. Number 2, you have difficulty saying no. One of the hallmarks of codependency is an inability to set boundaries. If you find yourself saying yes to things you don't want to do, whether it's taking on extra work, helping others when you're already exhausted, or staying in situations that drain you, it's likely a symptom of codependency. Let's take an example of Clara. She works as a part of a team in a fast paced environment, and she has always been the go to person when anyone needs help. Clara feels deeply responsible for her co workers' success and happiness. If someone on her team is struggling, she'll go out of her way to take on their work, even if she's already overwhelmed. She doesn't want to seem like she's not supportive, so she says yes to every request, even at the cost of her own health and personal time. Clara's need to please others and avoid letting them down becomes so intense that she starts to neglect her own physical and emotional needs. She's constantly working late, skipping meals, and missing out on time with her family. The more Clara sacrifices herself, the more she feels trapped in this cycle. At the same time, she becomes resentful because despite her efforts, her co-workers don't seem to appreciate her sacrifices. This behavior is classic codependency. Clara's self-worth is heavily tied to what she can do for others, and she believes that if she stops fixing things for her team, she'll be letting people down and will lose their approval. Number 3, you feel responsible for other people's happiness. When you're codependent, you often believe that the happiness of others rests in your hands. You feel the need to fix their problems or keep them from being upset, thinking that if you don't, something will fall apart. This might come from a deep-seated fear of rejection or the subconscious belief that if others are happy, you're worthy of love and approval. Let me explain this using the example of Lisa. Lisa is a mother whose grown-up children rely on her for emotional support, even though they're fully capable of taking care of themselves. Lisa feels it's her job to fix their problems. She's constantly rescuing them from bad decisions or bailing them out financially. Her sense of worth is tangled up in being needed, which leaves her emotionally drained and unable to focus on her own needs. Number 4, you avoid conflict at all costs. Codependents often fear conflict and avoid confrontation, even if it means ignoring their own feelings. You might sacrifice your own needs to keep the peace, which results in unresolved issues piling up over time. Take Tom, for instance, who's in a long-term relationship but always bottles up his frustrations. He's terrified of his partner getting upset, so he lets issues go unaddressed. Instead of expressing how he feels, he silently tolerates things that bother him, creating a passive-aggressive dynamic. Over time, this pattern erodes his sense of self and builds resentment. Number 5, you feel unworthy unless you're helping others. Another symptom of codependency is feeling like your value is only tied to how much you help others. If you're not busy fixing or caring for someone else, you feel guilty, anxious, or worthless. This is the pattern of trying to gain love and acceptance by being the helper or the caretaker, even at the expense of your own emotional well-being. Let's take Rachel, for example. Rachel is a friend who's always there when someone needs help, whether it's lending money, giving advice, or providing emotional support. She never takes time for herself because she believes her worth comes from being needed by others. Eventually, Rachel starts to feel exhausted, disconnected, and emotionally drained because she's given so much of herself away, yet never received the same level of care in return. Number 6, you ignore your own needs to please others. You might recognize that you're putting everyone else's needs ahead of your own. Your self-care takes a back seat, and your own happiness and well-being are often ignored. This is often rooted in a deep fear of rejection or an unconscious belief that others' happiness is more important than your own. Let's take Chris as an example. Chris has a group of friends who are constantly making plans that don't align with his interests. But instead of speaking up, Chris goes along with whatever they want. He's uncomfortable with his own preferences and fears being rejected if he doesn't conform. Over time, Chris begins to feel unfulfilled and disconnected from himself. Number 7, you feel like you can't be happy without someone else. This is another key sign of codependency. Your happiness depends on someone else's mood or actions. If your partner, friend, or family member is upset, you feel responsible and your mood takes a dive as well. You might feel like you can't be happy unless everyone else is happy. Let's take Monica as an example. Monica has been in a toxic relationship for years. Whenever her partner's upset, she feels like it's her fault and her whole day is ruined. She feels like she can't be happy unless he's happy, leaving her in a constant emotional roller coaster. Number 8, you stay in unhealthy relationships because you're afraid of being alone. A codependent person often stays in unhealthy relationships because the idea of being alone is terrifying. You may fear that without this relationship, you'll have no identity or purpose, and that you won't be loved. You might stay in a toxic relationship because you believe you won't find someone else to take care of you. Let's use Jake as an example. Jake is in a relationship with someone who constantly belittles him. Despite the emotional pain, Jake stays because he's terrified of being single. His subconscious mind convinces him that he needs this person to feel complete. This fear of loneliness keeps him stuck in an unhealthy cycle. And finally, number 9, you have low self-esteem. One of the root causes of codependency is a lack of self-worth. When you don't feel good about yourself, you rely on external validation, like someone else's approval, to feel valuable. This can leave you dependent on others' opinion to feel okay about yourself. Let's take Alex as an example. They've got to be my favorite person. I use this name in all my videos. Now, Alex constantly seeks praise from her boss and peers at work. She's always seeking approval, but never feels good enough. Her self-worth is directly tied to how others view her, leaving her feel empty and constantly striving for validation. Breaking free from codependency is a journey that begins with awareness and self-compassion. Once you recognize the pattern, the real work starts. Rebuilding a life where your needs, desires, and well-being take center stage. It's about shifting from a mindset of constant sacrifice to one of self-empowerment and healthy interdependence. This doesn't happen overnight, but it's possible. And it starts with these key steps. Number 1, set healthy boundaries. The first step in recovery is learning to set boundaries, something that codependents often struggle with. Boundaries are not about shutting people out. They're about respecting your own limits and communicating them clearly. For instance, when your friend asks for yet another favor that disrupts your own plan, it's okay to say, I'd love to help, but I need to focus on my own commitments right now. You don't have to feel guilty for not always being available. Setting boundaries may feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you've been conditioned to put others' needs above your own. But over time, setting and enforcing boundaries will empower you to protect your time, energy, and peace of mind. It's about recognizing that you can care for others without compromising your own well-being. Number 2, develop self-worth. Codependency often stems from an underlying sense of low self-worth. If you feel like you must constantly prove your value through what you do for others, it's time to reconnect with your intrinsic worth. You are valuable not because of how much you give or what you do, but simply because you exist. To start shifting your mindset, begin with daily self-affirmations. You can say, I'm worthy of love and respect as I am. And remind yourself that your worth is not contingent on others' approval or your ability to meet their needs. In fact, the more you practice validating your own feelings and actions, the less you'll rely on others to fill that emotional void. Start noticing when you're doing things just for validation and ask yourself, am I doing this because I want to or because I think I need to be needed? Remember, self-worth is an inside job and it takes time to rebuild. So be patient with yourself as you change old patterns of thoughts and behavior. Number 3, reprogram your subconscious mind. Much of codependency is driven by deep-seated subconscious beliefs that you've carried from childhood or past relationships. These beliefs can include thoughts like, I'm only lovable if I'm needed, or I must avoid conflict at all costs. Over time, these beliefs create automatic behaviors that support your codependent patterns, and they become harder to change on your own. This is where hypnotherapy can be incredibly powerful. By working with the subconscious mind, we can uncover the root causes of these patterns and begin to rewire those limiting beliefs. In a relaxed state, your subconscious becomes highly receptive to new empowering suggestions. Hypnotherapy can help you replace the old narrative with one that affirms your worth, encourages healthy boundaries, and empowers you to take care of yourself first. In fact, studies on the subconscious mind show that around 95% of our decisions, behavior, and emotions come from unconscious reprogramming. This means that if you can change the programming at the subconscious level, you can shift your entire way of being. Number 4, develop healthy relationships. One of the hardest aspects of recovering from codependency is learning how to engage in relationships that are healthy, not one-sided. Codependent relationships are typically imbalanced, with one person constantly giving while the other takes, often without realizing the toll it's taking on the giver. In recovery, learning to be in relationships where both individuals share responsibility and respect is key. Practice being with people who encourage your growth and whose needs and boundaries are respected just as much as your own. Take time to assess whether your relationship feels nourishing or draining. You see, when you engage with others from a place of mutual respect and care, you begin to experience the joy of balanced, healthy connections. Number 5, focus on self-care and healing. Self-care is a crucial part of the recovery process. When you've spent years putting others first, you may have neglected your own needs, physically, emotionally, and mentally. Self-care isn't just about bubble baths and massages, it's about prioritizing activities that nourish your body and mind. This could be as simple as just taking a walk, journaling, getting a good night's sleep, or practicing mindfulness. The goal here is to reconnect with yourself and honor your needs. The path to breaking free from codependency may seem daunting, but remember that recovery is a process and it begins with small, consistent steps. With the right tools such as boundary setting, affirming your self-worth, and reprogramming your subconscious mind, you can create a life where you're no longer trapped in the cycle of overgiving and people-pleasing. You deserve to be in relationships that are nurturing, reciprocal, and fulfilling. With time, patience, and the right support, you can cultivate healthy patterns that empower you to live with authenticity and joy. If you've recognized any of these signs of codependency in your life, remember that change is possible. That's it for this video. Feel free to share your thoughts or experiences in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you're navigating your own path to healing. I'll see you in the next one. Till then, take care.